This evening, it is a great pleasure to introduce Tony Reeves, who is the lead partner for digital defense in Deloitte UK. He's a self-confessed geek and has been for all of his life. He's an ex-army officer. He spent a lot of time on operations dealing with this kind of technology in a lot of interesting environments. He's obviously very focused now on artificial intelligence. He can talk more about what he does in much more detail than I can, and beyond what you've seen in the bio that's already been issued for him. But he clearly is talking on the topic of AI doesn't need leadership, which I think will be an interesting angle to put on this as well in the Leaders Club, quite obviously. It is something that is hugely important to all of us, and I think it's something that's really poorly understood by an awful lot of people as well, in terms of what it offers as opportunity, what it offers as potentially challenge and threat. So hopefully Tony's going to bring quite a lot of that out. What he doesn't bring out, please do ping him in questions, because that's after all what we're here for. So without further ado, Tony, over to you.
Folks, we're running experiments tonight, it seems. We're running experiments on the IT. Definitely, there's about 16 cables plugged into this. We're running experiments on me appearing on camera. I've been told I can stand here and here, and that's it. So you're going to get me moving a little bit around about. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. After that, questions. I know some of you already asked questions. I've seen a couple of them, and they're brilliant. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the questions. But before then, we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite subjects. Well, actually, my favorite subject is the end of the world and AI's part in it. And my second favorite subject is literally, how do leaders exploit AI? And how do we prevent AI exploiting us? I'm a digital evangelist. I genuinely believe I have seen the future. And that is the difference between a futurologist who tries to predict, an evangelist who believes it. And so a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes is genuinely based around my belief set and the work I've done previously. But I'm also going to be talking not just about the future, but also a fair bit of history, a little bit of ancient history, and then put that together into the future as where we're seeing it. And really what I'm trying to do is, what can we learn from similar technological revolutions we've seen in the past, a little bit on why leaders need AI, and then I'll try to suggest a few things about what future leaders can do or how they can work together. So I'm going to talk about basically 3 bits about me, 3 bits about AI, and 3 bits about how leaders can exploit it. But I said that we'll also do some history. So let's start with, why am I standing here today? As Bob said, I was in the army, I was in the infantry. I joined the infantry because it was the most fun. It was the simplest thing I could do, which was most relevant to being in the army. And I had a great time doing it. I really enjoyed being in operations. I spent a lot of time overseas, and genuinely having my leadership qualities tested and seeing other people who were brilliant leaders to learn from. So I come with a certain amount of experience on leadership, of a certain narrow perspective. I then left the army. I worked for a government agency. I did support and military operations with stuff like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Middle East, North Africa. And I saw a different perspective of leadership. I saw a very different perspective of leadership. And why I left the army was, at heart, I was a geek. And whilst infantry was great, blowing stuff up is great, I also enjoyed hacking things. I enjoyed coding. I started computer coding when I was 10 in 1980, and I've pretty much been doing that ever since. And at the time when I left the army, there was no job in the army that gave me the fun I had playing with computers, technology, large data sets. We did some bits. We did some AI, some inference machines back in the late 90s. It was pretty much like, we discovered this new continent. If we were Columbus, we'd found America in the 90s when it came to AI. We're looking at potential. We couldn't colonize it. We couldn't land on the planet AI and do brilliant stuff with it. We were frustrated with the things we could do, and the things we did were possibly a little bit unethical or weren't secured. And the reason being, regulation, government, controls, ethical standards, nobody thought about those at the time. We're still trying to explore this continent in this Wild West environment. So my geek heart took me into different areas, took me into spaces, which was great fun. Lots of interesting perspectives, and ultimately ended up working in Microsoft as their defense advisor, and trying to bring together technology organizations, defense industry, and government to exploit stuff on that. But the other thing I came to know very quickly, and where I've been very fortunate, I think, is I kind of knew myself pretty well. I was always that curious, annoying kid in school who asked why questions. I was that person who read lots of books. I was curious about how things work. That hacking side probably started when I was like 3 or 4 years old, trying to break things at home and trying to work out what happened with it, much to my mother's annoyance. So having this growth mindset was something that I grew up with, but I never knew what it was until later in my career. So I was lucky to have what I think was a fairly good understanding of myself, but I couldn't label it. I couldn't say it's one of those things. And I've seen other people leaving the military who perhaps haven't quite had that advantage. So I've got 3 bits. 1, leadership experience. 2, technology experience, and a fairly good understanding of myself as a whole. But enough about my history. Let's talk about some of the ancient history stuff. And I said we'd do some history bits. One of the things I believe is that AI is the new language. Not a new language, not a new thing, but the new language. If you go back a few years, about 4000 BCE, humans did 2 amazing things. First of all, they invented the wheel. And you must admit, if you're a bloke who came up with the wheel, you'd be going pretty chuffed at this point. It's like, I've got horse, I've got plank, I've got wheel. Look at this go. So at 4000 BC, we had the wheel. Around about the same time, we also started writing. And we started capturing ideas. But for a good 4000 years, up until about 800 BCE, language was captured very hard to translate. If you wrote, you had to understand every symbol. You couldn't read a sentence and construct it using phonetic alphabet, because that came about in 800 BCE. So in order to read, you spent decades learning how to read a document. Having learned it, you had to learn the context of that document. You had to learn all the symbols of that document, and then you could have a stab at understanding what the document was trying to say. This placed power in the hands of 2 people. Those people who could pay for scribes, normally in courts, in kings and emperors, and the scribes themselves who learned to read. 800 BCE, Greeks took and invented the phonetic alphabet. It was the first technology that allowed an individual to capture their thoughts, share it with somebody else who was not trained, had awareness of how to read, but could construct your thoughts by reading their thoughts. It used for the first time vowels. It allowed people suddenly to do a trade deal, to write down what they wanted to trade, how much they wanted to pay for it, to give it to somebody else outside the courts of their rulers, not using a scribe, and do that deal. This was revolutionary. This was utterly revolutionary, because now 3 things happened. Individuals could communicate their ideas and share them. Secondly, rulers lost their power and control. And thirdly, scribes became a bit irrelevant. Why am I saying this? Well, on one level, we took it to the printing press in 1440. We started democratizing that capability to share ideas and concepts. But it all dated back from the phonetic alphabet being invented. But the second bit is, it overturned the scribes and the courts of the day. And one of the things I'm saying is AI is the new language, in the same way as the phonetic alphabet was the new language, is it has the potential to overturn the current scribes and the current empires of software houses. In an organization, in a world, in a society where everything is digital, everything is driven by software, the power of software has created massive empires, massive government, massive organizations. It has also placed the power heavily in those who can code. And AI, as it starts to increasingly be able to code, and the interface with AI is the thing that makes it the new language. So what does that allow us to do? At the moment, coding using AI is pretty poorly done. You can do some very simple, fairly simple Python code. But when I first started playing with coding using AI in 2016, we could literally capture a screen and that was about it. But the pace of change and the scale of change is enormous, absolutely enormous. And so what we're going to see in the near future is using that new language of AI, using the interfaces that we're building with AI, the ability not to say, create a pretty picture of something, but create software create a Microsoft Office, create something that allows me to edit this document, to create a PowerPoint presentation. So not the content, not what we're seeing today with large language models, but the thing that creates that content, and to do so democratically and in a way that allows us to share information very rapidly. Now, when I speak to my friends who are geeks and technologists, they'll go, no, that's miles away, miles away. But look at the pace of change, look at the scale what we're dealing with. So at the moment, 50 billion connected devices by 2030. All of those providing, feeding, and inputting into AI, into systems that are collecting data. We have this very simple view. If we can repeat it, we can duplicate it. If we can duplicate it, we can digitize it, we can digitize it, we can automate it. And also, as you probably always see on a regular basis, 90% of all data is created in the last 2 years. And that keeps going up. What worries me from a leadership perspective of that 90% that keeps being created, we only ever look at about 5% of it. Think about the number of phone photos you've got, which you've taken at the time, so that's amazing, and never looked at again. If you look at government work, it's probably about 3 to 4% maximum of all data created in government, which is ever actually used for decisions, for actions, or just somebody reviewing it ever again since it's created. So that's the first bit. This idea that AI has fundamentally changed society that is driven, based, and run on software. And that the interfaces with AI has become more universal, as it become more common, as it become easier to use, the barriers of adoption of AI will no longer require geeks like me to help you code it, develop it, and build it. That interface will be, as that picture of the stone shows, in your hand, and the power behind that interface, the language that unlocks, will be truly game-changing. So that's my premise, that's my thesis, that's my disappointingly worrying worldview of the future. We are going to break huge parts of society. So, but let's talk about leadership in that future. Well, first of all, leaders desperately need AI. As I said, we've got 90% of all new data created every 2 years. How, as leaders, can we process, understand, and deliver insights on that data if we don't have automation and computation behind us to help us do it? Quite simply, to maintain pace, we need AI to help us provide insights. But the other bit is we're going to start seeing is increasingly hierarchies will become flatter. As individuals do more because of automation and AI, as individuals can scale more, being empowered through AI, that traditional hierarchy of large organizations, large teams, large structures is no longer needed to the same scale. Now, I know what some of you are thinking at this point, that every time we've had a traditional technology advantage, something's changed which comes along and says we've got new opportunities. And you look on the right-hand side, 1885, automobile comes along, huge industries, oil, mining, transportation, driving, personal mobile automobiles. Huge new industries that were generated. If you look on the left-hand side, horses and horse and carts. In 1885, there's 25 million horses in the United States. In 1914, there's 4 million horses, most of which were leisure animals, and the working animals were sadly glue. So at this point, you're looking at technology and AI, we're saying, well, it's going to create a whole new opportunity. I'd suggest that could be a myth. That could be a myth because the pace of change of what we're doing with AI. So the next slide might be a little bit scary for those people who don't like teeth. Every 3 months-ish, I run the same set of prompts across a whole bunch of large language models, image generators, and AI tools, just to see what the pace of change looks like and what happens. In the middle was September 22nd's view of the prompt, a barista making a cup of coffee in a coffee shop. This was using Midjourney. You'll notice, first of all, it's definitely not a photo. It's recognizable as a human. It's pretty poor. When you now look there at December 22nd, down the bottom right, definitely human, definitely photo. The teeth are worrying, and the eyes are completely out, and the hands a little bit weird. Go forward 3 months, top left. Teeth are still a worry, but the face is starting to come together. The eyes are starting to come into that perspective. May 23. So these are all called Sam as well, by the way. I end up naming most of my images. So Sam is pretty good when it comes to the face. They've hidden the teeth. They've clearly had a feedback which says, you're not very good at teeth, fix it. Eyes are characteristic. Let's count fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so hands are not great at this point. But let's have a look at September 23, a year later. Here is Sam. Fingers not still quite perfect. But that is a year's worth of development. Now, I know that's a simple image interpretation of where we are with AI. But the pace of change is happening so rapidly, how can regulation keep up with it? We started talking about GDPR in 2012. A decade later, we start getting GDPR introduced and really meaningfully meant. And what happens with it? It comes out of date very quickly. We are developing stuff so rapidly using AI that the pace of regulation, the pace of control, and the pace of adoption is much, much harder to introduce. As a case in point, when in Microsoft we came up with better than human language models in 2016, and basically humans are pretty rubbish, to be honest. Better than human means 15% error rate. So it's not like it's Einstein, it's somebody who can make less than 15% errors in translation. It took us 4 years to build that model, to go to English to Chinese. Within 12 months, we did 30 other languages. So AI scales rapidly once you've had the breakthrough. And we're having those breakthroughs so often that maintenance and availability is going to be really hard. And as a result of that, we are not creating the new jobs for people displaced by digital at the pace that we can displace them. It's a topic I keep coming back to. If you take the period 2005-2010, 7 million jobs lost in the US due to automation. Most of those, automation in manufacturing, car manufacturing, in particular Detroit. If you look at the availability of suitable replacement by AI for functions, not entire jobs, but functions, 40% of the workforce today is in high areas of high automation readiness. So the other two bits I want to quickly cover on is we need to curate our cultures for our team's futures, not for our past. And I'll come back to what I mean by that in a second. But let's look at traditional businesses compared to digital organizations. If you take the top 5 digital companies and the top 5 non-digital companies, those digital companies are worth 10 times the revenue of those traditional scaled companies. And yet those traditional scaled companies employ 5 times as many people as those digital organizations. 10 times the revenue, 5 times more on the traditional companies. So digital does not create jobs as it replaces traditional jobs in that same way, same scale, and it does generate more revenue, more growth. So we've got to balance these a bit. And so 3 future leadership challenges, which I'd just like to talk about. I'm trying to get into questions a bit. First of all, automation is replacing work faster than workers can adapt. It takes Deloitte about, working with some of our digital partners, 30 days to automate a call center. That call center will then be, for somebody phoning in, relatively efficient. It'll deal with 95+% of all use cases, and it'll sound like a human speaking and interacting with the person on the receiving end. The downside of that is 178,000 people live in Newcastle employed in call centers. Over 1 million people in the UK, 3% of our total workforce, work in call centers. At the moment, we've not automated those jobs. There's no pressing need to do so. But if we enter a recession, we start looking at where are costs? Where do we start to reduce overheads? Actually running a call center or digitizing it? At an individual firm level, that's quite a simple choice to make. At a sector level, 3% of the UK workforce being replaced, that's a decision the government will probably be very interested in before it happens. But a response time, 30 days to activate, probably a year or so to respond. So first of all, we are not replacing workers faster than we can adapt. Secondly, digital growth exceeds normal business skill and response times. In Detroit, when it happened in 2007, it went from the 4th largest city for population and wealth in the US to just outside the 40th in 3 years. Because of automation recession, the city itself started to crumble as a result. So we have this digital growth exceeds our response time. What happened with that? Over 47 and you living in Detroit, you're unemployed with no job prospects. 2/3 of those individuals went on to long-term sick leave because that's the only way they could get statements or support. That happened in a couple of years and before we did widespread digitization. And then finally, I want to talk about failure experiences. When most of us, actually, I'll look at the audience in here, when half of us, the older people, got to the position we're in today, you probably followed a career path which was very similar to your predecessor. if you do this, this, and this over your career, you'll probably be a partner in Deloitte, a chief information officer, a chief exec, or something similar to that. Here is the path to it. And coming from a military background, sadly, it's quite often, one day, son, all this will be yours if you do the following over the next 30 years. And for the younger members of the audience, you're probably looking and saying, what is my career path for the next 10 years, 20 years? How do I make that senior position? But automation is going to change that. Automation is going to reduce some of the jobs where you learn, the things that you fail at, the things that are normally seen as relatively easy to do, low impact, high learning value. But that's stuff that automation loves doing. So for the younger members of the audience, you have a future where you could potentially go from where you are today to chief exec, because everything else in between that is automated to some extent. But more worryingly, how do you learn? How do you learn from failure? And that surely demands leadership. So my last 3 points. Things I talk about with clients to myself. First of all, things that are future-proof for AI. Relevance. What makes you relevant as a leader? What makes you relevant to your team, to your customers, to your organization? Relevance is vital for your success as a leader and for your team's success. I'll also say it's really hard to automate. Understanding what could be relevant is easy. Really being relevant, that's hard. Second thing I talk about is tempo. We can do things faster with AI. We can do things much faster with AI. We can generate images, pictures in seconds, as opposed to taking photos, lining up models, getting things organized. But tempo is about relativity. It's about how fast can you do something compared to your competitors. It's also matched to the pace that your team can move. AI will do things faster. We need leaderships to do things at a tempo that's sustainable, relevant, and compared to our competitors, better. And the last thing I think is relatively future-proof is around growth mindset and learning from failure. I'd repeat that failure is a path to mastery. You can't do something well until you've done it wrong many times. Hopefully not too many times, but you have to fail. And yet the things that we are doing, the things we're automating, the middle management roles, the easy jobs, the things that make that booking, sort this out, fix this problem, rewrite this passage and make it more compelling. Those easy things we're automating. So I think as leaders, we really have to ask ourselves, where are we giving those failure experiences, which cost time, which cost money, which cost effort, rather than automating those failure experiences to remove cost, to remove time, or to remove effort? So I said that, why am I here today? Well, I'd leave with 3 things. One, around this mindset, experience, personality, about knowing ourselves. As leaders, if we don't know ourselves, if we don't know what we are doing, why we're doing it, how it works, then we are failing as a leader before automation. Secondly, surely we must be curating automation journeys. We must be thinking, what are our future leaders? Where are they coming from? What do they do? How do they learn? It is our job to curate that future. We cannot let people wander into this alone without support and help. We have to create those automation journeys for our teams. And then finally, we have to grow this relevant tempo. We have to make sure that our teams are performing to their best at a pace they can sustain. We are not implementing AI at a pace that is exceeding their ability to cope and respond. And that requires hard, difficult choices. At the end of the day, as leaders, preparing our teams for the future is the most important thing we can do. And I'd also suggest that in a future that is filled with AI, preparing for the future is the most important things that leaders can do in that space as well, because it is where AI needs leadership, helping our teams and AI prepare for that future together. I said I'd be about 20 minutes. I've gone slightly over, forgive me, but that's my hypothesis, that's my view, and I said I'm an evangelist. This is generally what I feel is going to happen in the future. But I'm happy to take questions on challenging on that 3 point or perspectives that people have been thinking about.
Tony.